Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I am here with the perennially popular and especially today the especially popular Reid Blackman. And Reid, I could go in and talk about all the amazing things you know and do, but before I do that, why don't you tell us about yourself?
My name is Reid Blackman. I'm the author of a book called Ethical Machines, which is a book about how organizations can can understand the ethical risks of AI and how to mitigate them. I'm the founder and CEO of Virtue, which is an ethical risk consultancy. I don't know what else. I'm advising Canada on their federal AI regulations currently. I've sat on EY's AI advisory board, a senior advisor to Deloitte's AI Institute, a volunteer to the nonprofit Government Blockchain Association as the chief ethics officer, and some other stuff. Former philosophy professor.
Yeah,
former trapeze instructor.
You sound incredibly bored, so we'll try to add some excitement.
Well, just listing, my resume is blah.
It's always a little awkward, so I appreciate you doing that. But the thing that's sort of at this moment that's super hot, the thing I thought was super hot was obviously the ChatGPT thing. But sure. Before we get into that's almost like low-hanging fruit. So I'm going to start with something else that I didn't know until you mentioned a second ago. I didn't realize you were on the ethics board for blockchain. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I missed how you phrased that properly.
Oh yeah, so I'm the volunteer chief ethics officer for the Government Blockchain Association. So the Government Blockchain Association, or the GBA, is an organization. It characterizes itself as a business league. So it's really an attempt to, as I understand it, it has two functions. One, to bring members of the blockchain community together, people who are working on blockchain projects, blockchain businesses, etc., to bring those people together, get them talking. The other main function is to bridge the gap between blockchain developers, entrepreneurs, etc., and government, to help government understand what blockchain is, what it's used for, and when and where it might be helpful in government to solve certain problems that government has to solve for.
So to me, the obvious issue that's been popping up in everyone's minds right now is a subset of blockchain, which is the crypto financial world, or just crypto as people call it. So could you talk a little bit? I mean, we can talk about the financial aspects of this, but I'm not a finance guy. I mean, I didn't have anything invested, and that's great, but I'm more talking about the ethical aspects of that. Specifically, the whole point of blockchain, as I've understood it, has always been the fact that it is transparent. What we're seeing, however, whether we're talking about Binance, whether we're talking about FTX, we're talking about any of those guys, the big issue has been the lack of transparency. Could you talk a little bit about how those two things work together when the largest groups, companies, are not transparent when their entire thesis is transparency?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because it gets at one of my main concerns. Before I talk about that concern, I just want to make sure that people understand, because blockchain is really confusing. I tell people that AI at the conceptual level, machine learning at the conceptual level, is really quite simple. It's not that complicated. I mean, there's inputs, there's outputs, there's training data, there's thresholds, there's weighting the variables to see how much they should count. There's it's just conceptually speaking, not that difficult. The math, the coding that underlies it, of course, that's phenomenally complex. But at a conceptual level, AI is just, machine learning is just software that learns by example. Not that complicated. Blockchain, that's a headache. At the conceptual level, it's very confusing. I mean, there's crazy terms that get thrown around, miners and proof of stake and proof of work and the Genesis block. It being immutable. There's just lots of complications that arise about validating a block. I mean, people talk about validating a block, which I still don't really understand, because you would think that the word validate indicates that it's verifying that something is the case, that something is true, or something along those lines. But that's not what validating means in this context. So it's very confusing. So just so we're clear, there's two things to point out, at least two things to point out about blockchain, just to make sure that the audience is on board. Number one, as you already accurately and helpfully pointed out, blockchain is not crypto. There's blockchain technology and there's cryptocurrency. cryptocurrency runs on a blockchain or the blockchain, but it's not the same thing. So you can use that technology to do lots of things. One of those things might be to create cryptocurrency, NFTs, et cetera, but you don't have to use blockchain for that. You can use it for a bunch of other stuff, like storing patient data, as is a sort of popular use case in the sense that lots of people talk about it. Okay, so that's one thing to say. The second thing to say is that if people want to understand blockchain, here's how I understand it. I think this is the simplest way that I can conceive of it and explain it to people, so I hope that it's helpful. Blockchain, and by the way, you'll hear people refer to the blockchain. A friend of mine gave me a helpful tip when people say the blockchain as though there's one blockchain. It's helpful to think of it as analogously to the cloud. People talk about the cloud, but of course there's lots of cloud services. So it doesn't mean that there's one big cloud. There's Dropbox, there's Google Drive. But people talk about the cloud. Similarly, people talk about the blockchain. So I think that's important so people don't get confused. And then eventually I'm going to answer your question, Darshan. I really will. After I'm done with the lecture.
You are laying the foundation of a great discussion. So I'm just going to let you keep going.
Okay. So then the way to think about blockchain, I think, is that it's a way of recording transactions between, let's just say, individuals for now, recording transactions between individuals, whatever that transaction is, buying, selling, trading, whatever. It's a way of recording transactions between individuals among multiple computers in such a way that you can't change anything in one record in one computer, without simultaneously changing it in another. So it's just record keeping of transactions across multiple computers such that you can't change the data or the information in one computer without simultaneously changing it in all the other computers in the network. So that's the way that I think of blockchain. Okay. Now, one of the there are public blockchains and there are private blockchains. Public blockchains, which are the most popular ones, I think that's fair to say. Cryptocurrencies run on public blockchains. They are transparent, as you've said, Darshan. That's supposedly one of the appeals of blockchain technology, and as applied to cryptocurrency, is that people can see the transactions. Now, you can't see necessarily my name. You'll see, you won't see Reid Blackman. You'll see, user XY2F432, some long thing, transferred, engage in a transaction with user blah 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 at this time or whatever. So you're not going to see that how much I transferred. You won't see that I sent money to Darshan, but you'll see that this pseudonymous version of me, it's called a public key, which is like an address, like an email address, sent money or sent something to this other address at such and such a time. So transparency, blockchain is transparent. That's awesome. But then we're running into this issue, as you rightly point out, Darshan, that there is a lack of transparency about what's going on with how these blockchains are being operated, how, say, cryptocurrencies like FTX are being operated. And the reason I think that's so crucial is that it underscores a massively important point that people miss when talking about blockchain, which is that all the blockchains are governed by smaller entities. So when you talk, the other thing about blockchain that you hear a lot is that it's decentralized, right? So, and in some sense, it is decentralized because it's records of transactions across, could be thousands of computers. I think Bitcoin runs on something like over 12,000 computers last I checked. So it's decentralized, and you get this sort of libertarian anarchist thing of, we're going around. We're excising the middleman. There's no government propping up the currency. There's no bank that's serving as an intermediary between the transactors, and so the bank can't take a cut. So we're cutting them out, and the governance of it is not centralized, or it's not centralized in a bank or the government, but it's decentralized because the records are on all the computers of the network. And then people start thinking, it's decentralized. Everyone, we're all equals here. Everyone gets to vote or something like that. And that could be farther from the truth. In fact, there are small bodies typically that govern the blockchain. There are governance questions like, how should we operate this blockchain? Or how should we operate this business that works with blockchain technology? Those things are very centralized. they're very subject to manipulation. They're very subject to attack. And they're very subject to being, how do I put this? Obfuscating actors, can I say that? But it's susceptible to having people who don't show you what's actually going on. So it lends itself to opacity as opposed to transparency. Okay, that's the end of my lecture. Thank you and good night. You take care.
It's funny you say that it's obfuscated. You talk about this, but it reminds me of two things. So the one big thing I'm thinking of is when they talk about, and I really am trying not to get into political philosophy because, again, not an expert in that either, but I always think about communism. And they always talk about how communism is set up to create a utopia. But every example of communism we've ever encountered has not worked out in the way you'd want it to. In the same way, it reminds me of, as a concept, blockchain is set up for success in that everyone's equal, all transactions are immutable and transparent, and we can all do so much more because we eliminate the middleman. I guess my question for you is this an example of growing pains as you see them? Or is this an example of, no, there's a fundamentally important value to these middle people, and removing these middle people takes away trust, and that lack of trust is fundamentally what will structurally destroy certain use cases like cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so okay, that's a big question, and the short answer, okay, so there's a number of things I want to say. Look, I think that government exists for a good reason. I think it serves certain important functions and purposes. The most obvious of which I think everyone should be on board with, Republican, Democrat, left, right, alike, is that at a minimum, the function of a government includes protecting its people from physical abuse, getting their human rights violated, getting their property stolen, being tricked or defrauded of money or which they need for the goods of life, necessary goods of life. I think that's got to be ground zero. What the government is there to do is to protect us, not just physical safety, but things like human rights and blah, 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 blah. We might disagree about the extent of things they need to protect us from, but it's got to at least have some kind of protective function. Insofar as anything in the world, whether it's blockchain technology or cars or airplanes or whatever it is, it really helps. Government's got to get involved to make sure that at a minimum, there's not negligence or recklessness involved in the creation and deployment of the tool. So yeah, I think that government is always going to have some kind of role to play, because that's its function. It's to protect us. That doesn't mean that it needs to be hyper controlling, right? I mean, I think that putting kind of safety features into cars and having speed limits, that's all reasonable stuff that keeps us more safe. But you could go too far. You don't want to not go far enough. And good governance is difficult, and we try hard to find the right balance. But that's the goal. To your other point, forget about putting government to the side, but banks play an important role. One being protecting consumers from, say, fraudulent transactions or fraudsters or identity thieves and the like. If I see a charge on my card that's not, I didn't do, I can call up the company and be like, that's not mine. They'll do an investigation. I've done this before. They, erase the charge. So there's some degree of protection I get because of that third party. There's no one to call with crypto, right? Someone steals a bunch of your crypto, good luck to you. You're
right.
Done. So yeah, there's cases in which having that third party protection is really, really important.
So, I mean, and I feel like crypto's rife with these scenarios, whether we're talking about the Mt. Gox thing, 10 years ago? I don't even know. I can't keep track of time.
I don't even know that. Mt. Gox?
Yeah, I think it was called Mt. Gox, where essentially it was another whole system that just sort of, they had issues. And then there were, obviously you've got your FTX that's coming up. People are arguing that Binance itself doesn't have enough transparency, etc. So this is a scenario right now where Bitcoin went from a high of in the 60,000s to currently about 18,000, if I remember correctly, as of this morning sometime. I guess my question at that point is this a scenario where we throw out the baby with the bathwater? And what I'm talking about is this idea that, and again, to be clear, I have not invested, as far as I know, in any crypto. But
as far as I know,
I keep wondering if
maybe you stay at 2 a.m. you accidentally put 10,000 on Ethereum.
Well, I'm more worried about like putting in $300 some point and just completely forgetting about it. And then
Sure.
I like to hope that one day it's going to be worth something, but I have no idea if I've done that, but I'm guessing not. But the point being, one of the big use cases that everyone's talked about over time is this idea that, you know what we might be able to do is use this for paying subjects in clinical trials. We don't need to know who the subjects are, but it's subject data. We'd like to be able to pay them. And we've done versions of that with different payment mechanisms, but we'd eliminate those fees and those charges and everything and directly pay subjects. Do you see that being a possible use case in the future, or is Bitcoin the wrong way to go about doing that?
So I do think that there are lots of, I don't know. I suspect that there are lots of use cases for blockchain technology, that some of which do include crypto and some of which do not. So I think, I don't think crypto is dead. I think it's going to resurface. It'll be born again in some fashion or other. I don't know when, but I think it'll happen. But even if crypto is dead, right? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it goes away. Blockchain technology is still here. And like we said, those are two different things. And there are potentially interesting use cases. For instance, storing patient data on a blockchain. Why is that useful? In principle, it's meant to give greater control to patient data by the patients themselves. They should be able to share it through or across different kinds of institutions, instead of being sort of siloed in in the software that the hospital that you first went to happens to have. Maybe it doesn't play well with the software that some other institution uses. You can't transfer them, but in principle, if you were on the blockchain, you could do that kind of thing. You could give your data and get compensated, in principle, say to researchers. You could share your data, say with the CDC, for the purposes of, for instance, tracking the spread of a virus. So there's really interesting use cases. I'm not a skeptic about blockchain technology, but I'm also not one of these people who are like, yeah, it's the future. Well, we'll see. It's too early. What we need more evidence. It's too early. Although the technology has in some sense been around for a long time, it's too early to know whether there are really good long-term, viable, sustainable, blockchain-powered solutions. Maybe there will be. There probably will be. We don't have that much evidence of it yet, though.
So what I hear you saying, and I actually agree with, is the fact that it's just another tool. And what we've sort of seen is, just like any tool, you're going to find things that work and find things that don't, and you're going to keep adapting and finding a new way to proverbially skin that cat. I guess my next question associated with it is, when you start using, and I have two questions that go with it, but when you start using things like blockchain, one of the things you talk about things like blockchain came about probably around, I think, 2012, 2013, really took off probably 2018, 2019, plus or minus. I'm not a historian.
Yeah, Bitcoin came around shortly after the financial crash in 2008.
Oh, was it really? I didn't realize it was
in
that
part
late.
as a response to the financial crash. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess what I'm wondering is, Bitcoin was a response, and I think what you landed up with was this idea that several people saw this as a way to get rich quick, and people did get rich. People became billionaires off of blockchain. Even those people right now, where blockchain's dropped to 1/3 of its price, are still billionaires because they may have bought it when it was worth $1. So. Sure. I'm not taking away from that, but is this a type of Ponzi scheme type situation where you are, and I'm not starting Bitcoin itself as a Ponzi scheme. What I'm wondering is this a situation where the rubes are getting into this too late and are being caught up in a system that they don't fully understand? And what responsibilities from an ethical standpoint do you have to protect these people? And is the government responsible for that? We talked about the role of government a few seconds ago. Is the government responsible for that? Or is this one of those situations where the government goes, we never sanctioned this, therefore I'm not going to protect you from it either?
Mm-hmm. Okay, lots of there's lots of parties here. I mean, one, there's the the creators of the crypto, the people who are trying to sell their crypto, who are trying to increase the value of the crypto. There's what are their ethical responsibilities. There's the ethical responsibilities of the buyer, so to speak, right? Is it just buyer beware, or is it no? It should just be buyer beware. The buyer has some responsibilities, but not total responsibility. Then there's the government, whether the government should have responsibilities, ethical responsibilities here. And the short answer, I think, is going to be something like yes, yes, and yes. There's plenty of sort of ethical responsibility to be distributed. So I do think that if you're creating a tool or the means by which people can easily be tricked, defrauded, etc., you've got a responsibility not only to mitigate the probability by virtue of how you're designing the technology, but also a responsibility to communicate to people, hey, listen, there's lots of fraudsters around here. There's, please, using our platform, whatever it is, please be careful, blah, 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 blah. So I do think that there's responsibility on behalf of the developers and the owners of the business. Remember, those are not always the same thing. There's the developers and there's the people who run the business. If there's a business built around the technology, and those are not always the same people. Sometimes they are, sometimes it's not. But so you've got the developers who have a responsibility to tell, say, senior executives, hey, listen, here's the way in which this thing can be abused. You have responsibility for the senior executives to communicate to various stakeholders what the risks are. Certainly not obfuscate the risks. That would be unethical. You've got the buyers of crypto or the users of the system have a responsibility to do at least some kind of due diligence, I think. There's an extent to which you might want to say buyer beware. That's not crazy. But if they don't know what they don't know, they don't even know that they're fraudsters or whatever. Well, so I think that there's some responsibility there for the users to look out for themselves. And then, if there's an area that is rife with corruption, fraud, etc., and lots of people are getting hurt, then the government, there's at least a prima facie case for thinking the government should step in and regulations, laws, etc. are appropriate. Lawsuits, arrests, etc. are appropriate. And that's what they're doing now, right? They're just taking with the FTX case, they're taking existing laws and applying them to the way this business is run. It's not blockchain specific stuff. It's just that, it looks like SBF did some pretty unethical things.
One of my favorite lines, I think this came out yesterday, where I think it's in the Southern District of New York, and the statement was something like, "We, as an entire department, don't have the resources to go after everything that's wrong in the system."
Yeah.
I thought that was such a great line. Like, we will lose all the money the entire Southern District of New York has because there's so many issues of fraud and negligence and blah 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 blah.
Yeah. And so you look for if you've got, of course, that there are limited resources, and so you look for the biggest, most systematic abuses. Those are the ones that one hopes that one goes after.
Right. So let's now take this and again, being respectful of your time, but I'm going to pivot just a little bit to this idea that so far we've talked about the intermediaries need to be, there's a value to the intermediaries, but these intermediaries can be expensive, they can be fraudulent, they can be the problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. What role does AI have in helping with these systems? Does AI, and I'm not talking about ChatGPT 3, I'm talking about version 5 of that, as opposed to version 3, where it does understand the system and can answer questions, and you can challenge it, etc.
Yeah. So you're thinking of, is this what you're asking me? Is it?
I have no idea.
I think, are you asking me whether there are use cases for AI that speak to people being able to do their due diligence on some particular product?
No. I guess that's part of what I'm asking. Maybe they can help with the due diligence itself. But I'm actually asking, can they be the intermediary itself? So instead of using Citibank or JP Morgan as the one that might theoretically hold your, or an FTX that'll hold your data, it's being done and managed by, the proof of work is confirmed by an AI, and the proof of stake is confirmed by an AI. Is there value in any of that, or not so much?
So it's not like proof of work and proof of stake. Proof of work and proof of stake are very confusing. they're not something that needs to be verified. They are the process by which things get verified.
Okay.
But again, verified doesn't mean shown to be true. So I might put that to the side for now, just because it's like it's a headache to do an audience. I guess I don't know. I don't know. I mean, your question sounds like, look, there are certain kinds of entities, third parties that provide us with certain kinds of protections.
Right.
Let's say a bank provides us with certain protections. Could there be a case of an AI playing that protective role?
Yeah, that was a much better phrase than I did. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. And I guess I think that the answer is probably no. I mean...
Ooh, interesting. I love it.
You know, the bank makes certain promises like, hey, listen, we're going to protect your money. And if there's a fraudulent thing, then we are going to investigate that fraud, that case of potential fraud. And we won't hold you accountable if there was a case of fraud. And we'll refund your account, blah, 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 blah. I don't see how an AI does all that. They're not going to investigate the fraud. They're not going to... I mean, first of all, AI today is so narrow. You know,
right.
You got a model, right? So it might be able to flag, you know, it can be used to flag fraudulent transactions, or at least potentially fraudulent transactions. Still needs verification by a human, usually. But it also can't do the investigation. It can't make a promise to you. It can't make a business case for anything, right? So this is not what AI does.
I love it. So what you're pointing out is the fact that AI at this point is not set up to do any of those things. It's more almost a general overall red flag throwing system, and then a human's got to go in and do their own independent analysis, at least as it exists right now.
I mean, the main thing that AI does now is it makes predictions. That's it. But, you know, you read it reads a bunch of medical records of various people. It reads those medical records, of people who, say, developed diabetes 2 years later. Mm-hmm. And then it gets good, one hopes, at predicting, when given a novel medical record, gets good at predicting the probability that this person will develop diabetes within the next 2 years. Right? It gets good at predicting whether or not this person is going to repay a mortgage.
Yeah.
It gets good at predicting whether or not this person is going to be good at the job, or will be a good student at this university, and so on.
But isn't that by definition a problem? Because it's predicting based on past information whether someone's going to be good at doing whatever. It does not consider aberrations. It does not consider the fact that there might be new data, because it's considering it's working off of a certain type of data, and it doesn't know necessarily how to analyze other data. Yeah. What I'm worried about is AI in general sort of becoming a self-feeding mechanism, and the only predictions it makes are based off of its own previous predictions, and therefore it just feeds on itself.
Okay, well, so here's the thing. Number one, that's how we mostly make predictions without AI.
Do we know? I don't know if I agree with that statement. I mean, I make predictions off of new data, new inputs all the time, because I have to consider new inputs.
Yeah, the question though is whether you're taking that new data and you're making your prediction based on other patterns that you recognized. Okay, fair enough. I don't know. What's an example? Like, you just learned. You thought she was going to. I'm just take a silly example. You thought she was going to win the race.
Yeah.
But then you learned that she's been drinking a lot of alcohol lately.
Right.
You're like, oh, new data. I now predict that she won't win the race.
Correct.
Why is that? Because there's some pattern that, I mean, this is one way of putting it anyway. I'm not saying it's convincing, but there's some pattern of people, a pattern of people getting too much into alcohol and then performance failing.
Right.
So it's not that it's not that it was pattern free. Your new prediction, it's that you took in some new data, and so of course your prediction is going to be the same because the new data indicates that there's a new pattern, and thus a different prediction is appropriate.
I guess my question is AI smart enough as it exists right now to consider additional patterns, or does it feed on its own initial patterns?
When things are totally novel, or relatively something like totally novel, it screws up. So it was really bad at making predictions about, what hotel traffic is going to look like in 2020.
Right.
Like if you used AI to predict how many guests are we going to book in May of 2020, it got it very wrong because it was not predicting a pandemic.
That's a wonderful example, though. Let's pick on that for a second. Would that, if ChatGPT-3 existed at that time, or whatever, if AI existed at that time in the way we're talking about, would it have known to go to the CDC data and go, there's an unusual pattern forming, I need to use that to inform? Okay, so that's what I was asking.
Yeah, you might say one thing that's the sort of interesting that we do that current AI doesn't, although who knows what's happening tomorrow, is that there's a way in which we're more open-minded. We're a little bit more sensitive to nuance.
Right.
We're a lot more sensitive to nuance, I think. And we might just hear something offhand and be like, oh, actually, that makes me think about this other thing. We'll make certain kinds of connections that lead us to start digging into something to learn something new and make different kinds of predictions. Like if you had your hotel traffic predictor,
right,
in 2019, it's just going to keep doing its thing. But
right.
You might be like, I heard about this stuff, outside of China, and now it's in Seattle. This doesn't look good. I'm guessing that people are going to stop traveling and hotels are going to be in trouble.
Right.
Yeah. AI is not going to do that. At least not, again, maybe sometime in the future, who knows? We don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what's going to happen, a month from now with AI. Like the next ChatGPT-3 thing, actually, number 4 is going to come out pretty soon.
Right.
So who knows 5 years from now what the kind of way in which AI can, as it were, scan context and update. But yeah, I can't do that right now.
So it cannot do that right now, and the question then becomes, because what we're talking about, the value of AI, as I've understood it, is its ability not just to understand data that's provided to it, but to take more points of data than the average human being, because it's just raw processing power. So it can consider not just Wuhan data from China, but tomorrow it might consider Ebola, and it might consider weather data, and all those coming together. And the point is, as you add more processing power, the stronger, the better the informed decision made by that AI would be.
That's the idea. The idea is supposed to be that all else equal, the more data, the better. But that's not always true. Sometimes you just get noise, right? And we might know it's noise, but the computer doesn't know it's noise, and so it screws up. So it's not brute force feed it all the data that we've got. It's going to matter what data you feed it, and don't forget that it's not just you might weight the variables in different ways. Like if you're making a prediction about whether they're going to pay back the mortgage or whether they're going to develop diabetes, you might weigh age more than exercise routine or vice versa.
Right.
Or you might weigh. So there's lots of design decisions that go into these things. It's not just like, here's what happened, data, tell us what's going to happen next. No, it's very complicated for how you do this thing.
So we are well past time, and I know you have a hard stop, so I'm going to call it. But Reid, this was amazing, because I really want to get into the next time you come on, if you're open to it as always. But next time you come on, to talk about those limitations of AI. Because everyone talks about the unlimited potential of AI, which, let's be honest, there is unlimited potential. But there are limitations, and every person I know who's an expert in certain things and looks at it goes, oh, this is like 50, 60, 70% good, but that 30% is really off. And anyone who doesn't have the nuance is going to miss it. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. But Reid, before we go, again, just to remind everyone, talk about your book. How can people reach you?
The book is called Ethical Machines. It's available for sale at most places: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart, blah blah blah. It'll be available in Japanese in, I think, 5 or so months. So if that's appealing, go for it. If you want to find me, I'm on LinkedIn. I post quite a bit on LinkedIn. My website is reidblackman.com. There's a bunch of articles there. Lots of articles on AI ethics there in particular. There's a crash course on AI ethics there. That's it. Google Reid Blackman, you'll find me.
Awesome. Thanks again, Reid.
Thanks so much.